All right, so welcome to the second lecture in our series about how to write FRQs. The original PowerPoint was put together by a gentleman named Jared Wayland, and it's based on information contained in the book Human Geography, edited by David Palmer. And I am, of course, Chris Gall, and I've edited the PowerPoint and am giving the lecture. So, first thing I want to talk to you about is different categories of information. And really, this is just a pretty common method of analyzing information, is to kind of look to see where can we categorize it. So a lot of times what FRQs will do is they'll require you to provide evidence for a concept from some specific category of information. So what you want to do as you're learning is make sure that you know a little bit about each of these different categories. Okay, so we'll go through about 4 of them. So the first one is economics. Okay, and when we talk about economics, especially in geography, really what we're talking about are levels of development. We're talking about things like wealth and poverty, where to find them, right? Employment and types of jobs, the structure and sectors of the economy. So those are kind of the big picture things. You don't need all the super specific economic information if you can know these things and also know a little bit about where you're going to look to find various things. For example, where in the world am I going to look if I want to find a more developed country or a less developed country? Where in the US am I going to look if I want to find high concentrations of wealth or poverty? Okay, and things like that, right? With the structure and sectors of the economy, it's useful to know, for example, in more developed countries, the workers tend to skew more towards the tertiary sector. In less developed countries, they skew more towards the the primary sector. Okay. Then we talk about politics and political science. Really, all you need to know are a little bit about government structure and where to find various types of government in the world. Also, a little bit about international relationships. So those are things like I'm drawing a total blank on the word, but anyways, those relationships where there's 3 or more countries that are involved and they negotiate basically a treaty, laws and legal systems. And laws and legal systems are things like the UN Convention on the Laws of the Sea. Okay, and things like that. So you don't need to know lots of super specific granular information about specific countries. But if, for example, you were to get asked which of the following is an example of a communist country, you should be able to identify from the list one of the handful of remaining communist countries in the world, right? Or if you get asked where in the world are you most likely to find an autocratic system, right? You should be able to say that, or a democratic system, okay? So that's really what we mean by that. So you want to know where in the world you're going to find different types of things. Other 2 categories are environmental and social or cultural. So when we talk about the environment, really you need to know a little bit about the physical environment, which is basically landforms, but remember that it's human geography, not physical geography. So a big piece of what we're looking for is how those impact humans. Okay. We also need to know a little bit about the natural environment, like plants and animals, and it's useful to know a little bit about where to find specific plants or specific animals. But again, you don't necessarily need to know a ton. What you need to focus on, though, is how that environment's impacting humans and also how humans are impacting that environment. Okay, you should know a little bit about climate, right? Where are the warmer areas of the earth, where are the colder areas of the earth, where are the damp areas of the earth, where are the dry areas of the earth, and things like that. And then also a little bit about pollution and resources. Okay, and when we talk about resources, that can overlap a little bit with the economic category, and part of what you'll notice is that there's areas of these categories that'll overlap, right? So resources, you should know kind of, for example, where are the major oil producing countries, or where are areas that are struggling for water, right? If we talk about pollution, you should know, for example, that India and China have extremely high rates of air pollution. Maybe know a little bit about the Paris Climate Accords, right? Or the Kyoto protocols. Okay, so when we talk about social and cultural, This is really, it's a very broad category, right? So it includes things like language, religion, ethnicity, gender roles, right? Cultural perspectives and views, health and human welfare. And in essence, what it really, when we talk about culture, what we're talking about is those things that you learn. But those things change across space, right? So the predominant language in the US is not the same as the predominant language in France, is not the same as the predominant language in China, and you should know a little bit about the spread of those things, right? You should know a little bit about which areas of the world are gender roles going to be more, not necessarily equal, but going to be coming together versus where are they more tightly divided in terms of gendered spaces and things like that. Right? You should know a little bit about various cultural perspectives and views, and that links back into that idea of gender roles. Okay, and cultural perspectives and views also kind of ties into that idea of religion, right? You should kind of know which areas of the world are predominantly Muslim, or which ones are Hindu, or which ones are Buddhist, or which ones are Christian. Okay, and you should know a little bit about what that means for the views of people in those areas of the world. So what does it mean for the way we perceive gender, or the way that we use space, okay, or even the way that we label things. And then we talk about health and welfare, right? One of the really common ways to measure development is to look at what is the health of the people. How well off are they? So we're going to move on. When you get a prompt, so this is when you're actually sitting down to write, whether it's in class or whether it's during the AP exam, first things first, slow yourself down. So read the prompt. Look at the maps, right? Or the graphs or the tables. And then read it again. Okay? Look for it, analyze it, look for the verbs that are going to tell you what type of writing you should be doing. We'll go through types of writing here in a little bit. Make sure that you know what you're being asked to do. Then read it again so that you know not only what am I being asked to do, but what information am I being asked to do that too. Then take some time to brainstorm the things you want to say, right, that you think you want to say, and then go back to the prompt again and say, is what I want to say, does that apply to this prompt? Okay, and then but start writing your actual response after you've really read the prompt several times. You know exactly what it's asking you to write about. You know exactly how it's asking you to write about it. Okay, and I cannot emphasize this enough. Think first, write second. Okay, because you want to make sure that you write in the right way so that you're not leaving points on the table by writing, by describing when you're asked to discuss, for example, or leaving points on the table because it's asking you about 20th century boundaries and barriers and you're talking about the Great Wall of China, which is not one, right? And you want to think first and write second as well, because that helps you generate a more complete answer when you actually sit down to write. So then you're not stuck tacking stuff on at the end and drawing arrows or scrawling in the margins, okay? Or going back, and you're a lot less likely to go back and say something that ends up being incorrect that you realize later on. Okay, so the next part, we're going to kind of get into how much do you have to write? Okay, because different types of writing call for different amounts of writing. This is another key way to kind of make sure that you're doing what you're asked to do. So we're talking about, for example, identify or define. These are fundamentally similar, or rather these are similar, but they're fundamentally different things. Okay, identifying, that just means you're naming it, right? They give you a map of two countries and they say which one is the unitarian government, and you say Japan. That's identify. Define is to give a definition. So you're going to be writing a little bit more, right? A couple of sentences. They're asking you to describe. You're not going anything less than a single full paragraph, okay? And probably a little bit more. Explain again. Single paragraph, but a little bit longer. No less than 5 to 7 sentences. And again, probably more, because you want to be thorough. Better to write too much than too little. Okay, they're asking you to analyze. That means what you're really doing is you're breaking down the prompt. So you're writing 2 or more paragraphs at a minimum. You're breaking something down into its pieces and you're talking about how do these pieces work together. Okay, if they're asking you to discuss something, then you're writing at length. That's like a whole page, maybe 2 pages. Okay, but you're writing at length. That's the important thing. Then we start to dig into not just how long do I write, but what are you actually writing? So if they ask you to identify, they want you to state a clear, concise, specific answer. These are the ones where a single sentence is good. Okay, you can add clarifying details, but just make sure that when you do that, you're not contradicting what you said to begin with. When they're asking you to define, what they want you to do is give a precise meaning or the basic qualities of something. Okay, what you really should do is provide a concrete, real-world, let me say that again, real-world example to help strengthen your definition. Because that way, if you're not quite right with your definition, but your example's spot on, that reader, they know you get it. Okay, you get it. You know what you're talking about, even if you can't quite explain it perfectly. Okay, we talk about describe. You want to represent something in words. So you're talking about the attributes or the characteristics of that, because this is geography. Really, we're looking at places or ideas, not generally so much people, but could also be theories, right? We're asking you to explain, and you want to give an account of. You want to add details, right? You want to make sure really that what you're doing is talking about something with some depth to it. Okay, offer reasons or examples. This helps make the idea more plainly understood. Okay, if they're asking about push factors from less developed countries, providing the example of political persecution of the Rohingya, for example, explains very clearly why the Rohingya might choose to leave Myanmar in order to move over to Bangladesh or onto a different country. Okay, if you're being asked to discuss something, that's really just a way of saying a considered review. You're talking about it in length. You want to include those definitions, the descriptions, the examples, the explanations. Okay, but you're writing at length about it. Think about it as like a discussion with a person. You don't discuss something with a person in 3 sentences. Right? If you and I are having a discussion, it's going to take us some time. It's going to take some time to really do that. Okay, so to just kind of wrap up, what we've gone ahead and done in this second video is talked about different categories of information that FRQs might ask you to use or to analyze. And then we've talked a little bit about how long should you expect to write for those major categories, and then also how to write. What are you actually writing with what these verbs ask you to do? If you have any questions, feel free to bring them into class and come see me, and I will see you next time I see you.